everybody. Just welcoming everybody. Going to give it a few seconds just so folks can enter the room, get settled. Hopefully everybody's got some lunch or got a bite to eat in between. And we'll let everybody get into the room. We'll start in just a couple of seconds. All right, everybody. Well, thanks again for coming back. We are just barely at noon, so good afternoon. Thanks for being here. If you weren't here for the first, I want to welcome you to the 12th Annual SEEK Forum Opening Day Lunch event. This session is called How Local Governments Can Seize the Moment, and we're going to talk about 2021 state budget and policy updates. And we're really fortunate today that we are going to feature a couple of speakers, longer sessions than we had in our opening plenary, to hear from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and from the Local Government Commission, our Director of Policy. And if you did join us for the opening plenary, you got a good taste for just how much is happening in this space of local energy and climate action in California. And at both a federal and state level, pandemic recovery efforts are meeting with stronger commitments to health, equity, clean energy, and climate change. And the intersection may result in an unprecedented wave. It's looking like an unprecedented wave of opportunity for local governments that are working on the ground trying to tackle multiple needs at once. And so if you're like me, you're trying to keep tabs on all of these significant policy shifts, and your head may be spinning. I remember what it was like when I was on the inside of local government, just trying to push my programs along, but I also needed to keep tabs on the latest news with policy, just so I can help my decision makers navigate us forward, plan out our next move, take advantage of what opportunities were coming. So we really hope this session will help you get your bearings on the latest budget and policy updates so that you know what you need to know in order to inform your work and get prepared for what's coming next. So we've asked our speakers here to summarize what's most relevant and critical for local practitioners advancing their energy and climate goals today in 2021. And just a quick note for those who weren't with us in the first session, we want to thank our sponsors for making this forum possible, including the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, BayREN, and SoCalREN. When we'd also like to thank additional sponsors, Terra Verde Energy, the Energy Coalition, and TRC companies for the support in planning this forum. And also thank you to our promotional partners who've helped tremendously with outreach, and their efforts have certainly been instrumental in ensuring that SEEK resources are shared with a diverse audience so that more local governments can hear and learn from one another, which is what we're here to do today. I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, just some Zoom features. You probably know this by now, but just be sure to keep yourself muted throughout the course of this event, unless you raised your hand and you want to be unmuted. We will track your questions through the chat box, but we also encourage you, if you'd like, to use the chat box to introduce yourself and engage with other participants, or you can reach out to SEEK staff directly. So you can find Kelsey Wolf-Cloud, Gabby Yimmer, and you can reach out to them about any technical issues that you're having. But do kind of keep tabs, because today's an interactive event and we are going to have an opportunity for Q&A with our speakers. So let me go ahead and introduce you to our speakers today. We are really fortunate to have Sarah White with us. She's Senior Advisor of Jobs and the Economy at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And she leads key state efforts to map an equitable high road transition to carbon neutrality. She works at the intersection of labor, workforce, and climate policy across OPR concerns. And we also have Roger Dickinson, and he serves as the Policy Director for the Local Government Commission. He provides direction and advocacy at the state and local levels for policies, programs, and priorities of the Commission. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Sarah White for her presentation. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Great. Thanks so much for having me here, and look forward to connecting with everyone who's gathered here to talk about the ways that local governments can engage in some of the work that we're doing across the administration and in the current budget. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the budget efforts to put California on the high road. And let me say a little bit about what I mean by the high road as we go through this, and specifically thinking about some of the work that we're doing around just transition, around high road transition, around energy and climate and workforce. So I'm not going to talk today about the full, is there something? Okay, it's about the full climate budget, resilience budget, although I can walk through that for folks. That is still being negotiated. A big piece of the climate budget is being negotiated, in fact, when the Congress comes back, when the legislature comes back from recess. So some of this is still all being decided as we go, but there is a key set of intersecting initiatives that I think will be of interest to all of you. One of the things that I've been leading for the last 2 years is the state's work to define a roadmap for just transition, which I know is of concern to this group. And we have really focused on having that be a regions up planning process, not something that the state can set a set of principles and some resources, but it's not us to decide what that transition looks like in each of your communities. So I'll talk a little bit today about what the resources we will be sending your way look like. I think that largely I want to talk about a set of regional intersectional approaches to jobs, to climate and energy, to equity, to shared prosperity that are of particular interest, I think, to the public sector. And the thing I want to spend the most time talking about is the Community Economic Resilience Fund. It is a $600 million regional economic development and just transition fund in the budget. And it comes out of our just transition planning over the last year. So if we can go to the next slide. So the things that I want to talk about that when I look at what you folks are all pulling together is we have a set of initiatives that address regional economies, that address workforce development, that address community capacity building and infrastructure where it intersects with all of those. So not just energy infrastructure, but climate resilience infrastructure, as well as housing, transportation, agriculture, forestry, other areas of critical intersection. And if you think about it from the jobs perspective, even a straight up energy investment is going to engage jobs in manufacturing, in transportation, in operations, in maintenance, in research and development. So there's no one single sector that we engage in terms of jobs, even when thinking about, say, the energy sector per se. So the way that these all come together is through the administration's vision of just transition, which is also a vision of recovery from COVID-19, which is the money that we're investing is the federal COVID-19 recovery money, as well as putting it in this Community Economic Resilience Fund. So if we want to go to the next slide, I want to say a word about what we mean by just transition, right? So I think that for most people, when you hear just transition, you think oil and gas is changing. What are we going to do with those workers? What are we going to do with the tax base in those counties? But we really think about just transition as a much broader transition. It's a transition of the entire economy of California to carbon neutrality and to an economy which is more sustainable and more equitable, to an economy which is not built on economic inequality. So how do we do that? And how do we build that in places? So the kinds of transitions that we're facing are not just a transition to carbon neutrality. I want to be clear about this. We need a transition that of all of the ways the economy is affected by global climate policy, by local climate impacts, by wildfire, by SIGMA, by drought, what's happening to agriculture, what's happening to forestry, what's happening in all of the energy sectors. There are macroeconomic disruptions across California that are affecting all of these things, and we want to get ahead of all of those. So the thing that we find with just transition is most people think that that's an economic transition. So some folks' jobs might be disrupted and we should think about training, but this is not for us primarily a training question. The question that we have in California is that we simply don't have enough quality jobs to move people into. So we don't need more training, we need better jobs and a better tax base. So this is what the work looks like. When we define our high road transition, we look at 5 buckets of work. So we're investing in economic diversification, we're investing in industry planning, We're investing in the kind of conversation we need to have about the safety net, which is largely a federal investment conversation. Then we have a conversation about workforce development, which is how are we going to connect folks to jobs that we are creating in our economically diverse regions, and then regional partnerships to make all of this work together. If we go to the next slide, and that's a lot of work, but there are different angles where you think you can join in with us. We do all of this on the following principles, because much of this work many of you have been engaged in all along, and we've seen great pieces of it everywhere, but nowhere altogether is there a close attention to equity. So in this case, we think about equity in a number of ways. We think in terms of just transition, not folks with decent jobs who may be losing them, but all the folks who've been excluded from opportunity, who have not typically had access to the labor market. We think about regions which have not been part of the storied California prosperity story. There's a lot of attention on the coasts and not as much on inland California. So can we do something about that? We think about inclusivity, which is about who gets to make decisions. So in our regional planning processes, we want to make sure, in particular, we have a long list of stakeholders, but one of the things that the state is committed to is making sure that the voices of labor and the voices of community have an equal standing at the table. We also are really focused on job quality. So rebuilding the economy, not by creating numbers of jobs, but quality jobs, jobs that can sustain families, jobs that pay decent wages with benefits, and a whole other list of things that count as job quality. And then also a sustainability element. So all of these projects have to be attention to sustainability, not straight up carbon removal and carbon reduction, but also old-fashioned, clean air and water and environmental concerns. So those are the principles around which we're building all of our initiatives in the buckets that I mentioned. So if we go to the next slide, I can say something a little bit more specific about a particular investment that is going to address all of these elements. So this is the Community Economic Resilience Fund. And the first piece of this, the first $50 million that will be going out will be to establish in every region of California a high road transition collaborative. This is a planning project. This will be a big table where labor, community, business, and government come together, also with workforce and economic development and philanthropy and the usual groups who need to be part of these conversations about what a region's economic future will look like. It will build on top of some of the good work that's already happening in regions. The state is simply going to say, you need to have a neutral intermediary convene these collaboratives. You will need to commission a high road economic transition report, which says what transition is going to look like, including the energy transition in your region and the ways that you're going to bring along all Californians. So that happens first. And then the bulk of the money, the remaining $550 million, will go out as implementation grants for economic development. I'll show what this looks like in just a moment, but the high road transition collaboratives, the planning process is going to look at each of the elements I discussed. There will be a plan for economic diversification. There will be a plan for industry transitions in industries that are fading or building up. There will be a plan for the safety net. There will be a plan for workforce development. What the investment is that comes in after that, the $550 million, will be for specifically economic development. That is for the economic diversification piece, which to us means job creation and rebuilding local tax bases. So we know that a lot of this work has been planned already. So to get money out the door in a hurry while we're building the collaboratives, there will be $50 million that goes out in implementation pilots, which is if you have a high road project that does economic development and you're ready to go, you can compete for that money and we will get that out the door immediately. The remainder of the money will come to fill in once the collaboratives have made their high road transition plans, and that is economic development money that can go for any number of, a vast number of possible projects. The only caveat is that it has to be closely tied to the workforce development, high road training partnerships. That is the state's model for workforce development. It has to be tied to some community capacity building, which is in the climate budget for regional climate collaboratives to ensure that community environmental justice groups are at the table and engaged and participating. It has to be connected to the infrastructure money that is coming both federally and from the state. So trying to weave together a lot of things that are happening in regions and localities through these collaboratives, and that this money will be the glue that pulls much of that together. So that's the SURF. And if you want to move to the final slide, I can sort of put this together. It's a little hard because I can't see your faces, but the final slide shows sort of what this looks like. So the first piece here, the regional partnerships, that is one of the first elements of our high road transition. This means inclusive planning for all the elements. And this is what SERP is building, these high road transition collaboratives. You have the industry planning piece. How are we going to build offshore wind? How are we going to close down refineries? How are we going to transition that in a way that makes sense in local economies? We are going to do that in a managed growth. And one of the things that looks like that in the budget is an investment in oil well capping and remediation. That is a specific project that will be part of industry planning. Just by way of example, the safety net conversation, this is services for workers and communities whose jobs are disrupted. This looks largely like rapid response and some ARPA funding and some innovative work to make sure that there is funding for transitions, for early retirement, et cetera, the kinds of things that a safety net fulfills. The economic diversification pot, that is the bulk of the money in this initiative. That goes to job creation, and that is the Community Economic Resilience Fund. And finally, last but not least, workforce development is a big piece of that. That is about equity, it is about skill delivery so that we can build the kind of clean energy infrastructure we want and the kind of climate resilience economy that we want. And this will be done through the high road training partnerships, which are also funded in the budget, have been funded up until now with GGRF money, but are now going to be funded with general fund. So it's a complicated set of things. We are looking to transform the entire California economy and put it on the high road in a lot of ways that affect our energy and our climate sectors. There, I'm sure, will be a lot of questions. I will leave it at that. It's a lot of information to digest, but happy to take your questions and talk more about this.
Thank you so much, Sarah. There have been a couple questions that have come in, so I'm just going to read them out. First, Geraldine Lopez asks, what is the high road transition timeline? Specifically, how long to get to implementation?
That's a great question. It depends on what you mean by the high road transition. So for the collaboratives, we expect that within a year, we're on a fast timeline because this is federal money, which has a 5-year spend on it. So the collaboratives should have a year to develop their plans. And we haven't fully worked out all the funding and that because this is still under negotiation, the leadership team, it is run, I should say this, it is run by a 3-agency leadership team of OPR, the labor agency, and GoBiz. The leadership team that is developing the guidelines for this will have a much more specific calendar. We think the runway looks like a year to develop these projects and then the remaining time to invest and get the investments up and running. So that is that. The high road transition itself, as a thing, I might say this is a long game. Like building a diversified economy, that's a 10-year game, right? So we have some things we can do in year 1 that we need to take steps to do that. And there's other things which we have to be able to plan for 5 years and 10 years. So a lot of this sort of deep systems and economic change, we're talking about a longer range set of planning.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Another question here from Alelia Parento. She asks, how will these high road collaboratives relate to or embed within existing regional collaboratives?
Right, we know there's so many regional jurisdictions and there are so many different kinds of collaboratives going on. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we have asked that the regions themselves, as this money will go out as an RFP, come together and say, for the purpose of doing a high road transition, this is the table we need to build. This is who's going to be at it. And they propose that and then we fund it. So who is the neutral intermediary? And the neutral intermediary should be convening leaders from each of those other tables, right? So there will be somebody from economic development, there will be somebody from planning, there will be somebody from environmental justice organizations, from community groups, from the chamber, from the workforce agencies, from the labor unions. There will be, and I've left out a lot of others, but so there will be expected to be representatives of all of those stakeholder groups and to not duplicate, but to sort of lift up the work that's been done by related partnerships. We haven't found a single organization that has focused on all of these things together or done it in a way that has shared governance.
Thank you. Annie Seacrest asks, where can we find more information on this? And I'll just dovetail on that to just, yeah, looking for where local governments can go to kind of navigate. Is there any particular contact or website?
Yeah, we are still negotiating this. This is the thing's a little bit crazy. So the Just Transition Roadmap is coming out in the next 2 weeks, at the same time that the final details of the Community Economic Resilience Fund will be settled. These will be announced far and wide. You can go to the OPR website. We do have a listserv for Just Transition. This is all part of that, so you can get the announcements if you go there. It's OPR.ca.gov and go to the Economic Development and Just Transition section. There's a listserv there, but we will be, as soon as we have settled the budget negotiations, we'll pull together the leadership team to develop the guidelines, and we will be advertising that sort of broad and wide so that people know how to engage in that process.
Okay, so you'll have a public comment period once it's released.
Okay, so there's two separate things. California's High Road Transition Plan, our Just Transition Plan, is coming out in 2 parts. The principles and structure of that will come out. There will be a public comment period on that. And meantime, we are building out a website which has many other bells and whistles for that work. And the guidelines for the Community Economic Resilience Fund will go out with the RFP as soon as we can get that out the door, but that takes some time to develop. So expecting fall.
Great. We've got a question here from Irene Mooson. Can you say more about how you expect SURF to coordinate with federal infrastructure funding?
Yes, that's a great question. There's not just federal infrastructure funding, there's also, I should say, the related, so the EDA has already put out a NOFO on a lot of monies that is going to go to the regions for economic development. We have not looked closely at that. We are working with our federal partners on that. That money will go to the regions, not through the states. We want to make sure that there are high road guidelines on that and that it is aligned with this money. So we can't supplant, but we want to align that. And we're hoping that the collaboratives can help coordinate that. One of the things that is in the funding for the collaboratives is specifically to embed a local coordinator to manage the federal and the state and the local initiatives that are happening around these kinds of investments. So there will be a person whose entire job it is to coordinate that. And we are working as the state to figure out how the infrastructure money is coming down. There's also a bunch of infrastructure investments in the state budget. And how does that work? We have said that the collaboratives have to be aware of and integrate with that work in their development plans, in their high road transition plans. So hopefully it is part of the same movement to build a regional and probably sub-regional economy on these principles that sort of lifts up all boats and is decided by all boats, right?
Then we have next a question from Andre Duvort. Who is the center of these collaboratives? Is that based on each county? Who is the state expecting to hear from?
Well, we'll have to learn more. This is, it's complicated, right? So we don't expect to hear from one person. The key thing is that there has to be a skilled intermediary. And this is one of the challenges in California and other places in the country, frankly, is there are not necessarily a lot of skilled, trusted intermediaries to broker these kinds of conversations. In some cases, it might be a community foundation, right? In some cases, it could be a labor union. In some cases, it could be an NPO. In some cases, it could be a community college. The challenge is that it has to have somebody who isn't seen to have a clear dog in the game, right? It has to be somebody who can coordinate all the voices and bring them together. And that looks different in every place. Some places it's a labor center at a university. So it looks very different who has the skills to mediate this and to really think hard about it. It's just somebody who has the skills to look across economic and workforce development, look across infrastructure, and not just come at it from a training perspective, for example. So I think there will shake out there. In most regions, there are a handful of logical leaders who will, they will coalesce and that we will go for we will fund the folks that the regions come together with a plan to say, this is who we want to be our lead. That is decided at a regional level, not at a state level.
I do want to point out for folks on the line that Serena did post a link that Sarah mentioned to the OPR website economic development webpage. There is another question here from Yale Keisel. I don't know if I said that right, but where in this framework can sustainability teams at local governments get involved?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think that would be directly two places. So one is directly in the work of the collaboratives. So you want to be at the table making decisions about what the future of the economy in your particular region looks like. What is the role of local government in making those decisions? And because sustainability is one of the key 4 principles, you can carry that message and carry that vision to the collaboratives and be participating in that and figure out what is the lane and the role for local government in those conversations. Absolutely. And I think also insofar as you are planning already for sustainability activities and economic development in your particular jurisdiction, that will be something that you'll want to bring to the table and include in the plan, right? You've already done a lot of thinking and planning around that, so we can build on that.
I'll just ask my own question. Do you foresee local governments being part of, and maybe this is coming out in the document, the discussion around what the outcomes can and should be and how those will be measured in terms of metrics for this program?
That's an interesting question. We would welcome input on this. We are going to, the metrics are something that the interagency leadership team is going to come up with as part of the guidelines. So we have 2 sets of metrics, right? One is sort of the qualifications. What is it that you have to show us you can do and will do in order to get the funds, right? And then what are the outcome from the funds? It's a little complicated because it's federal money. So there is a lot of federal requirements on the funds, which we are just sorting through now. But we are planning on, aside from the normal sort of fiscal measurements of what you have to say you're going to do, there will be different requirements for the collaboratives and for the economic development projects themselves. The economic development projects themselves may have job creation, job quality standards, et cetera, depending on what kind of project it is. For the collaboratives, we are working with some of our UC partners to develop a set of metrics, because there is no one single data set that gives us the answer. So how do you measure equity? How do you measure a high road economy? How do you measure the creation of quality jobs? These aren't just freestanding data sets. Sort of how do we measure inclusivity? So we'll be thinking hard with our experts and partners about what are the metrics we want to apply to measure those kinds of outcomes that we're pushing at. If we're pushing at a high road economy, it looks different than just number of people employed or number of businesses opened. We have all these other categories. So we have the high road metrics, which we are in the process of developing now.
Serena, do you see any hands raised? I don't.
I do not. If anyone would like to unmute themselves or ask to be unmuted to verbally ask your question, please do so now.
And maybe while people are thinking, I would just love if, you've done a lot of research and work in this area. Do you have data that you can kind of summarize for us in terms of where are the most promising areas for job creation in the next several years?
It really depends on the region and the industry. It's hard. There's some places that we saw during the pandemic where industry is really taking off, but it's an industry which is basically not great for the environment and not great for workers, right? And that is distribution, warehousing, the e-economy, right? So one question we have in this work is, how do we make that a high road industry? How do we take a place that is booming? It is one of the few places that has actually shown progress and wealth generation during the pandemic, but really has a lousy track record on air quality and on job quality. So how do we, go to a place? One of the challenges will be, how do we look at sectors which are contributing to the economy, but not in high road ways? And how do we make those jobs better, right? So that's one of the questions that we'll have in looking at these plans and these investments. Other places, in the energy sector, right? So really, what does it look like to build out renewables at scale in a way that we've seen that there have been really high quality job standards on that. What does it mean to build offshore wind? What does it mean to convert refineries? Sort of these kinds of questions. There's a lot of interesting questions that are happening right within different sectors, but I think the larger question is going to be for each region, what are not the industries that you're going to attract, but what is your skill set? What are your assets? What are you going to build up? It's basic cluster development, right? But it really thinks about what are you building on? So what's going to happen in the valley if land is fallowed for groundwater? What is the next phase of food innovation, of farm worker entrepreneurship? So really thinking hard about what the kinds of economic transitions will be in existing industries, rather than imagining that there's going to be some shining new industry that's going to come lift us up.
Well, I'm seeing some excitement start being generated in the chat box here. I think local governments are really interested. Annie Secret says she's looking forward to seeing more program details come out when they're finalized. In San Luis Obispo County, they're energized about the possibility of what offshore wind can do for our local economy, meeting climate goals, etc. Also hearing about incentives to go all electric, microgrid production and implementation, and water efficiency. So anyway, some interesting thoughts here. And I think to segue to our next speaker, I just wondered if you could, what relationship does this have, if any, with what may come out in the state's budget? Or is this a standalone? Is there any connection there?
I'm sorry, is that question to me?
It is, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it's deeply engaged in the state budget. So this Community Economic Resilience Fund is a budget initiative. It is in the budget. And it is, for the first time, originally it was part of the climate budget, then it was moved in to be part of the labor budget. And it is really trying to meaningfully connect to other pieces in the budget. So in the climate resilience budget, there is a regional climate collaboratives that will have to work closely with this project to, as I said, help support community groups to participate. It is going to connect directly to the workforce investment that is in the budget. It will connect directly to some of the infrastructure investments in the budget. And I just want to say in conclusion, so it ties to a lot of, we thought about this hard and through, like how this would connect to different pieces of the budget of the California Comeback Plan. Also really thinking, I want to get back to this, the big idea is, we need to think about guidelines and all of this, but really the idea is it's regions up. The idea is the state has a bunch of money. The state should not have a brilliant idea about what to do with it. We should give it to the regions, have some guidance on the standards we want to see applied, but let the regions decide how to build their own economies. And we really feel pretty strongly about that, rather than the state swooping in with a prescription. So, and we hope to see that across the budget.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And on behalf of the SEEK program, we would love to keep in touch and help spread information as things become finalized and make sure that local governments know as things progress. So thank you so much. I think I will turn it now over to our next speaker. And so I'd like to, hang on here, let me get my slides out. Okay. Well, I'd like to introduce Roger Dickinson. He is the Policy Director for the Local Government Commission, and he is going to take us through some high-level updates on some of the key policy budget updates around the state. Thanks, Roger.
Well, thanks, Angie, very much, and it's good to be with everybody today. Hope you are enjoying great weather wherever you are, particularly around California. And we find ourselves in truly uncharted territory, historically speaking, with respect to what challenges our state, nation, and the world face, and from the standpoint of what's happening in the legislative arena as well. Just for those who may not know, we're in the midst of what is called the summer recess for the state legislature. This session began, actually it began last December with members getting sworn in, but the real work began in February and March. Over the course of those months, more than 2,300 pieces of legislation, 2,300 bills were introduced. So you can imagine that they deal with a multitude of subjects, but climate and energy, of course, were central themes in legislation that that was offered by members this year. And if you are interested in looking for any particular piece of legislation, I'm gonna talk about a few select bills across that spectrum of energy and climate this afternoon. But if you're interested in any bill, you can Google bill search, and that will take you to a site that allows you to enter a bill number, or if you know the author's name of the bill, or even keywords, and find legislation that you're looking for. Or you can access that same site through the State Assembly or State Senate websites as well. The summer recess that we're in, we're right in the really in the middle of it. The legislature will return August 16th, and then there's a sprint to adjournment, which occurs September 10th. So any bills that remain alive as of today have to get across the finish line no later than September 10th in order to go to the governor for his consideration as to whether to sign them into law or to veto them. So as you can imagine, while the members themselves might be taking a little bit of a break, or the staff a little bit of a break, nobody gets a full break during the month-long summer recess. Everybody is at work and getting ready for that final month till the legislature goes home for the balance of the year. With that, maybe we can go to the next slide. I've just picked out 6 bills that I think are somewhat illustrative of the areas in which the legislature has focused efforts related to different aspects of climate and energy. I'm just going to talk about each of these briefly, talk a little bit about the budget, and then certainly happy to entertain any questions that might arise. The first bill is, as you can see, AB 965 by Mark Levine, who comes from Marin County. And it started out as a somewhat more bold piece of legislation, as most legislation often does. It gets narrowed down, skinnied down a little bit, if you will, as it goes through the process. But this bill really tries to address 2 things. One of which is to have the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, and the California Building Standards Commission, the CBSSC, look at regulations regarding non-residential buildings installing electric vehicle charging facilities and equipment. This, of course, is an effort to start getting at the need to vastly expand electric charging infrastructure in order to accommodate the growth of the zero emission vehicle fleet as a general matter, and truly as an underpinning of our success in moving away from fossil fuel driven vehicles over the next 15 years or so, and of course beyond. The legislation also requires HCD to look at certain factors, 2 factors, when considering a requirement or regulation to add vehicle charging infrastructure in residential buildings. And those 2 factors are whether that addition of electric charging infrastructure should only be required when a building is modified or additions are added to it, or some substantial change is made that requires construction. And secondly, to consider whether in that instance up to 20% of the parking spaces should be able to handle electric or zero emission vehicles So that's will be in the development, and as you can see, I've noted where the bill is currently in the Senate Appropriations Committee. So just from a process standpoint, as generally applies, to succeed, this bill will have to get out of the Senate Appropriations Committee, be voted on favorably on the Senate floor. It will go back to the Assembly if that happens, where the Assembly will be asked to agree with the amendments that have been made in the Senate. If that happens, which is called concurrence, then the bill would go to the governor for his consideration. So we can move to the next bill. And this is AB 585 by Robert Rivas. Assemblymember Rivas has been very active in the climate and energy category over his time in the legislature. This bill would, as you can see, establish a new program run through the existing ICARP program, which I suspect many of you are familiar with, to try to focus attention, effort, resources on what is obviously a huge issue for us with respect to climate, which is the heat island effect and extreme heat. So this legislation would try to coordinate the different efforts that are going on at the state level, so that they are harmonized, and it would provide a process for grants to local governments to address extreme heat and urban heat island effect. It does not have funding in it per se, but it would be the conduit for funding that certainly could become available through the budget process or by other appropriation should the legislation be successful. And as you can see, it as well is in the Senate Appropriations Committee. So let's move on to the next piece of legislation. This is a very significant bill this year. It builds on some earlier efforts by Assemblymember Kevin Mullen. AB 897 would actually look at the support the state can give and encouragement the state can give to existing regional climate adaptation collaboratives, and for the creation in those places that don't have such a collaborative of new collaboratives. It would again put the Office of Planning and Research, and I should say it's a pleasure to share the platform this afternoon with Sarah, because OPR is so active and integral to the efforts to make sure that we're at a state level as intelligently and efficiently as possible addressing climate challenges that we face. This is a piece of legislation that should dovetail, should it become law, with the budget that I'll talk about in a few minutes with respect to efforts to organize and efficiently use money to advance climate adaptation planning and implementation at the local level. Again, it is focused at efforts that would occur on a regional and local scale. So let's go on to the next one. This is SB 99 by Senator Bill Dodd from Napa. I know there are those of you who are tuned in who are familiar with this legislation, and it's really principally twofold in that it would authorize the creation of a technical assistance and grant program for local governments through the California Energy Commission, so that they could, that local governments could develop resilience plans for interruptions of electrical power and keep critical local facilities going under those circumstances. And as you know, we are at risk and experiencing electrical interruptions in particular in an increasing number of circumstances, whether it's wildfire or wind or other circumstances. And so it has been a real problem in terms of losing critical local facilities under those circumstances of those interruptions. So this would try to organize again a systematic approach to that, and would also, as a second element, expedite permit approval for distributed energy resources. The Public Utilities Commission has also opened a proceeding on this subject. And so those two are proceeding somewhat in, that is the legislation and the CPUC's effort, somewhat in parallel. One would hope that they will be integrated as well. But Senator Dodd is certainly one who represents an area that has seen the real life impacts of these kinds of interruptions. And so there's the hope here that we can advance the use of microgrids and distributed energy resources to make sure that not only do we not have to take critical local facilities offline, but that the backup to keep them online is a low or zero emission, is clean energy in the process. And so why don't we move to the next one? SB 551 by Henry Stern is an example of the effort by the state to elevate and again coordinate what's going on with promotion, marketing, distribution of ZEVs throughout California. This bill also includes looking at workforce development. So really the authority, if this bill is successful, would take the overall umbrella of all of the different programs going on at the state level regarding ZEVs and try to bring them together in a coordinated fashion. And let's move to the next one. SB 617 by Scott Wiener of San Francisco is actually a bill that was not successful and did not get out of the Senate Appropriations Committee earlier this year. It would have authorized and funded the development and implementation of online automated permitting for residential solar systems. In fact, a number of jurisdictions have gone to remote inspections, for example. Perhaps haven't gone as far as online automated permitting. So this was an attempt to advance that effort, especially to try to reduce the cost of installation and the time it takes to install solar systems by the online automated permitting. But there'll be a happy ending to this story, even though Senator Wiener was not specifically successful with this bill. And I'll tell you about that happy ending in just 1 minute. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, no, back up one. There we go. There's the happy ending. The budget bill actually includes $20 million for the Energy Commission to make grants for implementing online solar permitting by local governments, the very object of Senator Wiener's bill. So it points out that sometimes there is more than one way to get across the goal line. So it's great to see this money included in the budget. And I might just say for this year's budget that we have a truly historic occasion with a budget surplus totaling about $100 billion. There's nothing we've ever seen that measures up to this in any respect. About 25 billion of that is from the federal government, the American Rescue Plan, 75 billion generated by the California revenues to give us the kind of money that we can obviously use in many ways to improve the quality of life in the state. But it's one also that means we'll be distributing this money over a number of years. You can't push it all out in 1 year, especially with some new and innovative efforts such as are going on. And so let's go to the last slide before we turn to questions. And that's the climate resilience package. The legislature and the governor, as you can see, have agreed to a $3.7 billion climate resilience package over the next 3 years, but have not defined what will be in that package. The current year allocation is $440 million, but it remains to be seen not only how that $440 million gets spent in the current, what is going to make up the overall $3.7 billion package over the next likely 3 years. It may stretch out longer than that, and we'll have to see. But as you can see, the possibilities include a number of different elements. Again, we expect it to be focused at the regional and the local level, as opposed to state programs. So the expectation is that this money will be handed out ultimately, say, through state conservancies, through local governments, through regional climate adaptations, through metropolitan planning organizations. All this remains to be defined. It's a very, very exciting prospect, but there are a lot of blanks left to fill in. So that's one definitely to stay tuned on. It is anticipated the legislature will act on filling in those blanks and pass legislation on this before they leave, and that should happen either late August or early September, it looks like now. But I know some of you I'm sure are involved in this, and certainly Local Government Commission is very involved in it as well. With that, I'll just put up the slide, if you will. If you have questions after we conclude today, or you want to reach me about legislation or something in the policy arena through the Local Government Commission, there's my contact information. And Angie, with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you, Roger. LGC and all of us are very fortunate to have you tracking all of this for us. A lot of big movement. We do have a question from Geraldine Lopez Mendoza. She asks, if you had to pick a winner from this group of proposed legislation, which do you think has the highest likelihood of success in getting passed and signed by the governor?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. I would say all the bills that are still alive at this point have a very good chance, actually, of getting across the finish line. They've gone through the bulk of the process. They've gone through policy committees in both houses. They've gone through the fiscal committees, and at least in one house. And so I would think that every one of these bills, of course, SB 617, as I said, is not still alive. But of the other 5, I would rate their prospects as very, very good to get to the governor. And I would think the governor would be inclined to sign these bills as well. I don't see one among these that looks particularly problematic in that regard.
Okay, great. So somebody here is asking, it sounds like, for maybe some career advice, just asking about whether or not a master's degree in policy would be preferred to do this kind of work, and give some insight.
A master's degree in policy is always a great thing to have, no matter what career path I think a person may take. But there are there's a lot of staff who work for the legislature, who work for the various policy committees. Having an advanced degree in policy certainly is a great element to have in anyone's background if there's an interest in that kind of work. And of course, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of organizations, private sector, both commercial companies as well as nonprofits that are engaged in the legislative process. And so they're looking for people who have background and expertise and skill in policy development, analysis, and advocacy as well. So that's just the direct application of having a degree in policy. There are lots of different ways to use it. So I think it's a real asset.
There's another question from Aunt Seacrest and Slow. She says, great summary, Roger. So if a bill is in the works and doesn't get signed next month, is it dead, or can it be worked on again in the next session?
So what happens now so let's take a bill that in fact is successful in the legislature and goes to the governor, and the governor vetoes the bill, that bill is dead. However, the legislature will reconvene in January for the second year of the session. Each session is 2 years, and the author whose bill is vetoed or some other member of the legislature can reintroduce either the same bill or make modifications. What often happens is if the governor vetoes a bill, the author will look at what's in the comments by the governor as to why he vetoed the bill, and that's known as the veto message. Then try to modify the bill to accommodate whatever the comments are about why the bill was vetoed, and then go through the process again. You start again from zero. You start from the beginning and have to go all the way through the process. But I can just tell you a small personal story. As a member of the assembly, I had a bill vetoed by the governor. I looked at his veto message, modified it, ran it again through the legislature, got to the governor, changed it the way the governor had suggested in the veto message, and he vetoed it a second time. And so a third time I took the bill and modified it a little bit more and changed it, and third time got it to the governor and he signed it. So a bill might die, but an idea never has to die.
There are maybe 3 more questions. Are there any bills looking at electrifying public transit, buses and trains, mainly?
There aren't bills that I can think of offhand that address that in particular, but there is, I should say, substantial funding in the budget for electrifying and using other forms of propulsion for transit vehicles. So there's going to be money made available to local transit districts, significant amount of money to electrify their fleets. I anticipate there will also be money and incentives in the federal infrastructure legislation, should it be successful, to do the same thing.
Thanks for that question, Bruno. Now from Robert Perry. Do you think these bills will motivate state agencies to take a more broad approach in meeting state goals? I'm thinking particularly of upcoming CPUC proceeding concerning a high distributed energy future.
I do think that the agencies look at what the legislature does and take cues from that. And in that case, the CPUC proceeding, as I mentioned, runs somewhat in parallel with Senator Dodd's bill. Senator Dodd's bill, SB 99, is signed into law. I would be surprised if the CPUC didn't take notice of that and look at the direction that the state legislature wants to go. I would see them harmonizing those two.
Maybe with our last minute or so of the Q&A session, I have a question for you. Just sort of looking big picture, what advice do you have for local governments that are out here trying to think of what's coming next, trying to see what's coming next, positioning themselves and trying to prepare for the next opportunities that might look like eventually when these policies become appropriations, become solicitations? Where should they be looking? Where should they be preparing?
It's a great question, Angie, and I think that it is not too early at all to look at what's in this year's budget. You can find on the governor's website a summary of the budget, identify those areas where if you're in local government, you have an interest. There's going to be literally billions of dollars over the next several years available in the climate and energy categories for planning and implementation of various kinds of projects and programs and a lot of local jurisdictions haven't had the resources to do the kind of planning that they would like to and need to do. So whether we're talking about electrifying public transit, or we're talking about dealing with sea level rise, I mean, whatever the subject might be, there's going to be money available through the state over the next several years. So now is definitely the time to be doing the research and getting cranked up and getting ready to submit grant proposals and requests to the particular state agencies involved.
Yeah, find those partners. Thank you so much, Roger. Really appreciate it. Thanks again to Sarah. Both of our speakers were great. Thank you all for asking good questions. Serena, if you can move us to the next slide, we want to thank again our sponsors, and really we would like your feedback on these sessions as we continue along. So if you could please provide your feedback on this session for a chance to win a $50 gift card. There's going to be something posted in the chat, a link for a survey. So please respond to that if you can. We'd really love to increase participation there and hear what you have to say. And then here's what's coming next. So thank you so much if you participated in both events today. There's more coming this week. So I really welcome you to come back, join us on the 4th for a webinar called Championing Cross-Cutting Programs, Effective Equity and Climate Resilience Partnership. That will be followed by a lunch event on Resilience Hubs, Equitable Climate Solutions, and then another event, Soup to Nuts, an interagency approach to guiding constituents from education to energy savings. That will be on the 5th. So those are the events coming this week. We totally appreciate your participation, and we welcome you to join us again tomorrow.